Hello and welcome aboard episode 2 of Talent Alchemy, departing today on a journey to a skills-based destination. And joining us in the cockpit are our special guests from Delta Airlines, the crew that turned their skills-based vision into reality using SAP SuccessFactors. They have navigated turbulence, charted new routes, and proven that when you invest in people's skills, the sky is truly the limit. So sit back and enjoy the journey as we explore how Delta is reimagining talent one skill at a time. This is your host, Rinky, and you are listening to Talent Alchemy, turning skills into success with AI. Natalie and Trevor, welcome. And it's an honor to have you both as my first guest in the podcast. I'm really excited to have you both here. Could you start by introducing yourselves and sharing your roles in Delta's skills-based transformation journey?
Sure. And thank you so much, Rinky, for having us. We're honored. We know we've been on this journey together for quite some time, and it's nice to have the time and space for us to reflect on everything that we've worked through together. So as Rinky mentioned, my name is Natalie Tincher. I'm a general manager at Delta Airlines, and I lead our enterprise skills strategy among some of our other talent processes and strategies here at Delta, and work really closely with Trevor Greer, who I know is going to introduce himself in a minute. I think it's quite a treat that we get to have this conversation together on both the strategy side and the technical side. And you can't do something like this without both pieces. And so really excited for this conversation today. And I'll turn it over to you, Trevor.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you again, Rinky. I know it's a long journey for us, so many conversations, collaborative engagements. But again, my name is Trevor Greer. I'm the solutions partner for talent at Delta Airlines. I really lead a very talented group of technical experts who help innovate and deliver enhancements and programs for our wonderful business partners. And for the sake of our conversation here, was the technical lead on the talent side for our engagement with skills.
Yeah, thank you both. I know it's a long way since the first Miami design workshop in like 2022, I guess October. So tell us a bit about the skills transformation project.
Sure. Yes, I'll jump in. So Delta's been on this skills-based transformation for quite some time. I would say officially since 2019, but unofficially for many years before that. We've always been a culture that is focused on internal mobility and making Delta a place where we want people to explore different career paths and spend their career here. I'm reflecting on a story just a few weeks ago. I was at a Delta event and I talked to a flight attendant who told me that her father worked in our technical operations space. Her husband used to be a pilot at Delta, and now both of her children are looking to join the Delta family as well. And that is not uncommon. So that is something we see all the time here at Delta. And so it was really a natural transition for us to really think through how do we create more transparency across the organization in terms of what jobs are available and what skills you need to be successful in those jobs, and being able to really hand that information over to all of our employees and say, your careers are in your hands. We want you to stay. We want to help you figure out the place within this company or the multiple places where you're going to be passionate, where you're going to be successful and really excited to come to work today. That is really what we were after. And skills was elevating the culture that was in place already for quite some time.
Yeah, and I know you went live with what, around 100K employees?
Yep.
Yes.
International and domestic, flight attendants all the way to our general managers.
Wow, that's awesome. And Natalie, you talked about skills transformation, and that's a big shift, not just for HR, but for the entire company, the enterprise. So, what was the initial reaction when you introduced this idea internally to the team?
So, when we were going through and, really bringing this out into the organization, there was a lot of change management education that we initially had to kind of make it clear to our employees was the aims of our journey. But once we kind of got over that quick hurdle, you would see on calls that we had several webinars, we had focus groups, user groups, from top to bottom. And once we kind of got over the initial strategy and vision of where we were trying to go, you could just clearly see all the light bulbs going off on those calls. all the conversations, that this has been something that our employees have been asking for, maybe not directly over time, but giving them the tools and really like what Natalie is saying, the transparency to what is being asked for in these jobs, having clear pathways for development and learning, and a lot of even peer to peer relationships that through technology and the framework that we've built, building those bridges, building clear, concise ways that people understand of it's no longer just waiting on helping you have a good hiring manager or knowing someone in a different part of the organization, that we're really putting the tools in their hands. And it's just been nothing but positive feedback so far.
And what's so interesting about what you just said, Trevor, is I think the initial reaction was easy. The hard part was keeping the momentum going as we were doing all of the building, because it takes many years to get the infrastructure right. I mean, Rinky, you know better than anyone else how long systems take to set up and just catch up with strategy, and how long it takes to build all the information that you need to make the system successful. And so there was so much about how do we keep the excitement going and make sure that people knew this wasn't just a talk track, but this was something that we were truly committed to rolling out. And so there were ups and downs with that. There was something called COVID, right, that happened in between. And of course, that was a pause for all of us in the world in general. But I think that was a really important piece of us just getting to where we are today, is making sure people knew that this was for real and we were committed to making sure that this happened for our employees.
I love it. Yeah. And you truly have been champions of this journey from the start, you know. So before we dive deep into the topic of skills transformation, I just have to ask this. If you had to describe the early phase in one word, what would that be?
I'll go first. I would say if we were going to put to one word, would be collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I know the old adage of it takes a village. Really, this was one of those projects that it wasn't just global talent or HRIT. We had engagement from, our HR business partners, the divisions themselves, the organization, the frontline groups. We had our compensation group, global learn and global talent, that so many teams had to collaborate and march to the same beat to get this program delivered. But we've seen nothing but, while the project is now live, we've really been able to maintain those, earned relationships across the groups. And so even past the project go live, we've seen the fruits of that labor from relationship building that continue onwards, just because we had to all be down in the trenches together to make this a reality.
Thank you, Trevor, for giving me a minute to think. And even after that minute of thinking, I'm going to cheat a little bit and use two words, if that's okay. I think for me, it would be trial and error. And that might not sound great, but I think it's the reality of whenever you do something that's not only new for your organization, but new for many organizations and in the industry and at the world at large. A lot of times you just have to jump in and try things, and then you realize what doesn't work and you shift. And that was truly what we've been doing for the last 5 years. And there's been so much new technology. I mean, AI wasn't even really a word that we talked about much when we started this journey in 2019. And now it's something we talk about in every conversation every day. So it truly was something that was an iterative approach, like Trevor said, collaborative, and took some time to figure out the approach that worked best for Delta.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalie. And I know it's truly is a long journey. And I know I have been talking to you both or associated with this project since 2021. I think you both have emphasized, I mean, whenever we have talked offline also, that having a strong job architecture was critical before you mapping the skills. So can you walk us through why that mattered, why the job architecture was so important?
Why don't you get this one kicked off, Natalie? And I think I do have
Awesome.
a slide that might help with this part of the conversation for sure.
Sounds great. So I'll start from the skills strategy perspective and why having a job architecture was really important for us as a starting point. And it really came down to creating a good organization as our jobs. At Delta, we're over 100,000 employees in total. And in our salaried merit population, we're 15,000 jobs that most would tell you are all unique and all require different skills and are constantly evolving and changing. And it would have been completely impossible for us to map skills to 15,000 jobs. We'd still be doing that right now, 5 years later, if that was a strategy we took. And by the time we mapped all those skills, they would have changed. And so having this job taxonomy and the ability to really map skills at that functional level created consistency for us. It created organization and it created just a framework that was a lot more manageable to start as a starting point. Over time, we will be able to build onto that job taxonomy and create more personalization at that position level. But as a starting point, that was not where we could manageably get to. And so it was really important from that angle. Trevor, from your perspective, what would you add on the technology side?
You know, when it's saying that we're implementing that job taxonomy, it sounds so easy, but the amount of work that actually went into making that job taxonomy live is no short of a massive undertaking, which, not to scare anyone, but for us, how our job taxonomy is ultimately tied to our job codes. And prior to us really kind of riding the ship when it came to our job taxonomies, that we had so many job codes there, just the data was all over the place. And so when we were kicking off this project, we really came to a decision that for us to even be able to manage any of this, we really need to standardize and make it into a way that our job taxonomy is something that's manageable to work with. And so that for us on the technology side, that required a comprehensive analysis of how job codes are used in our organization, those downstream systems. As our fearless leader, Tim Gregory, would say, it's, opening the patient, that if we're going to do this, make this change, we're going to do it right. And we're going to go and touch all those systems that necessitate it. And, it was a journey, even just to do the jobs, but from our compensation, our pay, it's made our operations so much more consistent and allowing us to even do things like market-based pay and really making sure that we are supporting not just skills, but all of our downstream processes that really rely on these job taxonomies.
Right, right. Yeah. No, I think that's great insight. And when you started, I mean, when Delta first started the journey, even the pre-packaged skill solutions or open skill ecosystem partners, that wasn't available too. So how did you go about defining your approach and setting up your skills framework?
Yeah, I can jump in and talk a little bit about that. When, as you mentioned, when we started this journey, specifically mapping skills, there wasn't a lot of technology out there, and there wasn't a lot of companies that had already done this. Our starting point was working with Mercer Consulting, and they have an external library of skills. And that was really important to us. We wanted to make sure we were not mapping skills to jobs in a vacuum, but that we were really considering the external market and trends and skills of the future. But we also knew we couldn't just take that external skills library and just say, okay, we're all done. This is what we're going to use at Delta, because then internally, we wouldn't get the buy-in we needed to move forward. And so much of the work that we did after we got that internal and initial skills library from Mercer was bringing together many groups within HR. Trevor and others on his team were part of this conversation, our compensation partners, our talent acquisition partners, and made some decisions on what our skill strategy was going to look like. So things like, how many skills were we going to map to each job? How many proficiencies were going to be mapped to each skill? What were we calling our skills and what was the definition? Something I still laugh about today is I remember somebody Googled skill and there came up with like 150 different definitions. So Google can't even figure out, maybe ChatGPT could now, but a few years ago, Google could not figure out one definition for skill. So even us aligning on what our common language of what a skill meant at Delta was really important. And so that collaboration and then bringing in subject matter experts from across the business, people who are actually doing these jobs every day, them being able to weigh in and validate those skills and determine which of those skills from that initial list we got were the ones that made sense or that were most critical for our jobs at Delta. And that started the buy in early because now all of those 500 plus people across Delta that were part of the skill validation process already knew what was happening and then could go out to their peers and say, you can trust this because HR didn't do this. I actually weighed into that. And that was really important, yeah, from a strategy perspective for us.
Yeah, and when I talk about building blocks for a skills-based transformation, I always talk about skill strategy and how those pre-work is important. And I remember that time when you spend a lot of time, quality time on those pre-work, which is very important. And if any customers are listening, I'll advise that also. I think that's a key takeaway to invest the time before when you launch the solution, the groundwork. So let's talk about success factors now. So you use Talent Intelligence Hub and SuccessFactor Career and Talent Development Solution. So how did they help making their skills visible or meaningful for your employees?
Yeah, so I think for this one, when Natalie's going through and talking about, the work that we went through to gain alignment and get that stakeholder buy-in from our SMEs or leaders about skills, I think we have to remember at the end of the day, skills is not a new concept. Skills has been around forever. But really where we talked to numerous companies and where we found that before, our recent partnership with SAP, Talent Intelligence Hub and Career and Development, that while skills was there, the technology just couldn't keep up with the rapidly changing environment that for so many customers, I'd recall, we having a conversation, I think it was Julie actually, that she had asked the question to the audience to say, all right, you went through this whole project, you spent 2 years building your job taxonomy, your skill taxonomy, you went live. How quick was that skills data obsoleted? And the resounding answer was launch day plus one. There just immediately was obsolete because the skills data is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so when we got to embarking on this journey, that's when we worked with you, Rinky, and your wonderful team of going through and saying, how can we take this strategy, this vision, and make it actionable, something that we can actually work towards and have flexibility to keep it up to date. And so I distinctly remember the early days of Talent Intelligence Hub where there was not much there, but seeing it come to where it is today. Through the technology, we've been able to not only showcase an employee's skills, the transparency of what is required to get to that next level, but it's also creating levels of personalized recommendations that say I want to build my acceptance criteria skill sets that through one or click views that you can see here's all the learning content that has been mapped to it. Here's potential mentoring opportunities, maybe short-term assignments.
Yeah.
And, something that is all very near and dear to us right now is building out, an assessment strategy, really trying to not just say that you have a skill, but having a layer of backing, a level of validation and accreditation to say that it's not just me saying I have the skill at this proficiency. I have credible results to say, here's the backing to say I truly do have this skill.
And, we have to, on behalf of SAP, I think we have to thank you and the Delta Airlines team because a lot of your use cases actually helped us shape that SuccessFactor career and talent development solution. There were so many great use cases. We took that, we went to whiteboard. So thank you for that. And Trevor, you talked about personalized recommendations, right? And when we talk about personalized recommendations, there is AI. What did it take to build trust in the system, especially among employees? Because everybody's skeptical about AI or data-driven recommendations. So what was it? How did you build that trust?
It's not trust, is by nature, it's something that it takes time to build, but also takes a single moment to lose it. So for a lot of our team, we put so much attention in reviewing the recommendations, the outputs of the engines and, the AI algorithms that um, we have to have a level of, acceptance or confidence on our team before we've, turned it on for our employees. And
Okay.
so as we've gone through, there's been numerous rounds of testing, review, and, we've been working with some other vendors to kind of evaluate their softwares as well. But one thing I would say is once you put that content in front of the employee, as long as there's some level of relevance, I think most people won't shake their
Hmm.
heads at it. And through filtering and restrictions of those outputs, it does get us to a layer of, that confidence in the data. And it's not even just AI leveraging it for the end user.
Hmm.
There's also AI use cases that Natalie and I are working on right now to not just present in front of our employees, but also our administrators, just because we
Hmm.
understand that maintaining a skills framework, a job taxonomy
Hmm.
is no easy feat, and that we need that assistance through generative AI and, having human in the loop feedback from our hiring managers, our recruiters who are ultimately sourcing those skills to keep that data up to date and what something that we call keeping that evergreen data live and well.
Yep. And Natalie, do you have any point of view from a strategy perspective in building trust among employees?
I do. So, one, I would say to your earlier point, Trevor, when you mentioned that skills go out of date immediately, AI is critical. So, that's the only way we're going to be able to keep up with it. So, I completely agree with that point. From an employee perspective, I would say the trust is still building. I think, like with any AI product, you have people who are really excited, and those are going to be the people that you need to continue to lean in on to help make others excited. And then you're going to have the people that don't even want to open it or try it or think it is the worst thing in the world, right? I think we get the most divisive feedback that we've ever got when we talk about any AI products right now. And that's normal when something is new. I think what was important about our talent hub system fueled by talent intelligence hub and success factors is we didn't lead with AI. Led with this was built by employees for employees and it was all verified by employees, and AI is going to help make the experience better for them over time, but it was really important that our employees know that this wasn't just generated information based off of what HR thought or what the computer was telling us, but they had Trevor said it well, human in the loop. They were in the loop, and now we're just going to make their experience better by layering on AI solutions.
I absolutely love that. I'm going to use that later. Like it was built by the employee for the employees
Mhm.
and the human in the loop. I think I love that. That is important. So, were there any surprising outcomes? Maybe something you even didn't plan, but that turned out to be a big win in the long run?
Yeah, I will say I have a recent story about that, and it was something I was surprised by. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go to one of our flagship events that Delta holds multiple times a year. It's called Velvet, and it's an opportunity for really our frontline employees who are out in the field every day supporting customers to hear from our leaders. And part of that session, we have a career development session. And it's been going on for a long time. And it used to be so focused on jobs. Everybody would come into that session and just complain about they've applied for 100 jobs and they haven't gotten any and they haven't gotten any feedback. Or trying to identify a hiring manager or a TA person that they can sit and talk to. And what I noticed for the first time a few weeks ago, which was about a month after we rolled out our Talent Hub system to the full organization, is people were asking better questions about development. They wanted to know how they can job shadow, how they could use the Talent Hub tool to find better connections and to prepare for roles. And it really, as I reflected on that, I think for so many, development can feel really theoretical and intangible. They don't really know what to do. And so the job and the end game always felt the most tangible. And now, by us rolling out a system like Talent Hub that has all of this skill information, network recommendations, learning linked to all of our content, we're really giving our employees the tools to take their development in their own hands. And we're already seeing the benefits of that because they're now asking the right questions or the questions that we were hoping employees would ask all along. But we
Yeah.
shouldn't have been surprised that they weren't asking it because we weren't giving them the right tools.
Right, right. Yeah. I love that. No, I think that's incredible when you see, really the outcome and it's a positive
Hmm.
outcome. It's really incredible. You just went live. It's been a long journey, but for companies who are just starting out, what's that one piece of advice you would give to help them turn their skills-based vision to a reality?
Yeah, I'll get us kicked off here. So, and I'm sure I've said this at other, engagements and speaking, but really at the end of the day, it's just get started somewhere, right? The more that you sit and try to plan, you're just going to spin your wheels. So even like for us, like started with HR, work with a group that you feel comfortable with, that you have a good line of sight to what maybe the job taxonomy might be, what the skill taxonomy might be, regardless of your maturity as an organization for your job taxonomy, your job hierarchy, your skills taxonomy, that just get the ball rolling. Because for us, while we did have kind of stakeholder or executive leadership that helped push this through, it really made it come alive when we actually were able to connect the dots and present it in front of our leaders, our employees, to say, here's where we're trying to go. And as Natalie really chimed into at the beginning of this, it's iterate, iterate, iterate. You're not going to get it right on the first pass, and not be afraid of failure. Because if you have your employees engaged in the process, engaged in the building of your systems, that way it makes it that much more relatable and relevant to them. And it's not just something that HR is trying to push out for the organization. It really is built for them.
You're right. Yep. Yep. And Natalie?
Sure. So I would say two things. One, similar to Trevor, don't focus on perfection, just focus on progress. Even if you think you have the perfect solution, as soon as you get into it, times change, you learn different things, and then a different solution might pop up. So, as Trevor mentioned, that iterative process is so important. And a lot of companies that I have the privilege of connecting with will say they're caught up in trying to find the right solution. And then 6 months goes by and then they feel behind the curve. So that was really important for us. And the other thing I would say is involve many, but be clear on who your decision makers are. Because I think a double edged sword of making something collaborative is people could spin their wheels a little bit because there's usually a lot of great opinions and no one clear answer. So knowing that, for example, right, Trevor and his team were the final decision makers on the product, and my team was the final decision makers on strategy. And then we had certain things that were compensation or TA or strategy related. It's really critical to understand who's the consultants in the situation versus who are the ones that ultimately are going to make that decision at the end
Yeah.
of the day.
That's some great piece of advice. When I talk to my customers too, that's what I tell them. Start small, but start now. And start with a pilot, and then you could refine along the way. You don't have to wait until everything is perfect. So, what's next for Delta in your skills journey? Are there any new use cases or new innovations you are excited about?
Something that is top of mind for me right now is how do we utilize all of our employee skill information to inform workforce planning and the future of our workforce at Delta? Something that we now have that we never had before is the ability to understand and use common language for what skills are going to be most critical to move Delta into the future, or to make sure we are here in another 100 years from now, because we just hit our 100-year anniversary this year, but also understand what skills our employees have that go beyond the jobs that they're in today. So we could pretty easily understand what skills our employees have based on their current jobs, but we have such talented employees out there that have come to Delta with so many different experiences and backgrounds. And
Uh-huh.
now we have the opportunity and the ability to understand all of those holistic skills our employees have. And how do we start to really assess those against each other? What skills do we need? What skills do our employees have? And how do we help upskill those who are interested so that when we do need to pull on people in a different way, or we do have new opportunities that come about and we need to fill those roles quickly, we now have a surplus of internal employees that can do that. And we don't have to jump to the external market as a first step. So that to me is something, and I'm starting to see so much external research about that also, of how do you use skills to inform the future of the workforce. It's definitely something that we're starting to do at Delta, but I'll use my trial and error words again, that I think we're going to go through the same iteration process.
Once the foundation is ready, which you have, I think skills-based workforce planning seems like a natural progression. I want to see how that turns out.
Yes, I think we're all interested. From a technology side, I'd be remiss about, mentioning AI in some capacity. It feels like each day there's new models, there's new use cases coming out, new vendors that are, hitting the market. And one thing that Delta's been very particular on is, we put a lot of emphasis in the review of AI. And it's
Mhm.
not just going off and building or buying AI for the sake of having AI. We really are doing an analysis to saying, is it fruitful for the organization? Is it worthy? Do we get a lot of value out of it? So trying to understand, use cases of helping our management of the data, providing more ways for employees to have assistance in building their products. A term I've heard the Josh Bersin company share is, the HR super worker, right? You want to empower your staff to
Mhm.
be more productive, not take away jobs with AI, but rather make them more productive to help them with their tool sets. And so that's where, in the technology side, it's looking at that. And then really something that I feel a lot of companies are going to come up against as they mature their solutions is not only the whole topic around proficiencies and validating their skills, but also learning that we have found that over all the years that we've had an LMS, that we have tens of thousands of content that we've either purchased from third party providers or built our own. And so we have this large library of content, but now that we have skills, we're trying to evaluate saying, how can we map all this content to skills so that way it can better inform our employees about what learning content, if I'm going to be elective and take this content, that I can get, either credit for those skills or just know that if I need to sharpen my pencil on a certain skill set, here's the true list of course content that I can take to develop
Wow.
those skills.
Wow, I love that. Awesome. Natalie and Trevor, those were some great piece of advice. Before I let you go, I have one last question. And I love asking this one. I have started a series in my podcast called Art of the Possible for Skills Transformation.
Mhm.
And that is focused on a theme, Mission Impossible, the movie. And the mission being trying to retain the super skilled employee Ethan Hunt. I mean, who don't want to retain Ethan Hunt? So if you skills transformation were a movie title, what would it be?
Ooh,
What
that's a good one. You'll probably laugh at this, but I would equate it to National Lampoon's Vacation. It was something that, we had this journey in mind saying we want to get to this destination.
yeah,
But throughout the project, nothing went as the way we thought it would. We came with great intentions in mind, but as we kind of went down this path, we had things come left, right, and center that caused us to change course. And it's not always, for the bad, it was always for the good too.
yeah,
That we had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable throughout the case of this project. And we did get to the destination, maybe a little battered here and there, a little blood, sweat, and tears, but it was all good. And we, made the journey, but it was not the journey that I think we all had anticipated when we started on it.
love that. Natalie, what was your movie title?
Yeah, so mine is Apollo 13. And I will tell you, it's a movie I think my dad watched 100 times as I was growing up. So it plays in my head quite frequently. But although I will say our skills-based transformation is not as intense as the crew in Apollo 13 having to figure out how to safely get back to Earth after they had an explosion in their space shuttle. So definitely not to that extent. I don't want to put them on the same playing field there. But to me, where there are similarities is they were also going into a journey with a lot of unknown. They were doing something unprecedented, which is really what this whole skills journey has been from us. And they had to, in order to survive at the end, right? They had to all stop what they were doing and work together and
Yeah.
figure out how, as a team with all their different strengths, they can make it back to Earth safely. And Trevor said at the beginning of the call, but I just want to emphasize it again, that the effort of making something like this come to life could not have happened with every part of HR and every part of the business. And it forced us to work in a different way, because especially in HR, and I don't think this is unique to Delta, we do really well in our silos. We build our great processes, we roll them out, and we move on. Skills doesn't work like that. Skills will not be successful if it's a siloed project. So that collaboration and teamwork is truly, I would say, the thing that made this successful and come to life at Delta. And I know in the movie, it was the way that they were all able to make it home safe to their families at the end of it. So I
No,
love this question, Ranky. Thank you
yeah,
for
yeah.
bringing
No, I
some fun
love
to
that.
this.
I would have never thought about those two movies though. Truly, Delta has navigated a new flight path for everyone else to follow through. And thank you so much for your time. And I have to tell you, when I first thought about my podcast, I manifested that my first guest would be Delta Airlines. So thank you so much for
We're
your time.
very honored.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.